Isn't it crazy how time flies? As of this year, I've been a Macintosh user on a pretty regular basis now for 18 years. Back in 2001 was when I started using the Macintosh um, full time, or at least on a pretty regular basis, in school for my computer graphics class. During my entire high school career from '01 to '05, I was utilizing the Apple eMac. In fact, whenever I see one of these, I think back to those days with fondness, playing around in Adobe Illustrator and Adobe InDesign. And to this day, of all the creative apps that I've used, I think InDesign will probably remain my favorite because it was an article publishing app which incorporated both artistic and writing forms, and it was one of the things that I genuinely do miss, excuse me, about my high school days. But it's just crazy how it's been 18 years, and in all that time, so much has changed. Because I remember I was watching the part three of a video of Macworld 2000, Steve Jobs introducing macOS 10, and I remember those interface elements, things like these oblong, bubbly blue, um, scroll bars and these honestly cartoonish, beautiful, check boxes and pull down lists. And I realize that that's going to sound, very trivial to a lot of people. It's like, oh, this is what it is, it works, whatever. But the truth of the matter is, um, you know, Rob Burgess, the then CEO of Macromedia, I don't know if he still is, but he mentioned in his little segment during that keynote, Apple is design. This was back in 2000. Apple is design. Like they are the top when it comes to design. And obviously, nothing lasts forever. But to think that it's been 20 years and all these changes, it's crazy. Like I said, back in high school, I would happily use Illustrator, InDesign, Photoshop, Final Cut Pro, all these things to unleash my creativity. Nowadays, if I wanted to, I could. I honestly could go back and try and do it again if I wanted to. The problem is the software has changed so much that I'd basically have to um, reteach myself how to use it. Although I suspect, given that I'd used it for the last 5 years, as long as the basic control elements are still there, I don't suspect I would have any problem. But no, InDesign and Illustrator were honestly two of my favorite pieces of software. And now we fast forward 20 years to the day when, because if you remember during those days with Steve Jobs, um, Apple, back before he took the helm back in '98, was licensing their their operating system and their technology out to third-party hardware vendors, and they're doing it again. They are genuinely doing it again. I mean, we've got iTunes on Samsung TVs. We've got um, Apple Music available on Google's Android platform. Um, Now, initially, I think, and I could be wrong about this, but I think initially Steve was resistant to iTunes on Windows, and then he saw, the potential because a lot of Windows users were using the iPod, and he thought, you know what, maybe we should go ahead and build, you know. But that was one thing. If Steve were still alive today, I'm almost positive that Apple Music would not be on Android because he here's the thing. Back during the development of the iPhone, Eric Schmidt was on the board. He was the then CEO of Google. He was on the board for the Apple iPhone, okay? He was on the board at Apple when the iPhone was in development. He stole, or at least this is what people are saying, he stole the design elements for the iPhone and took them back and started to work on Android. When Steve found out about this, he blew his top so high that he basically declared all-out war against Google, and he took that war to his grave. So I honestly don't think that Apple would be, in the position in they would not be near as willing to cut a deal with third parties to get things like, again, iTunes on Android, Apple Music, on Android, iTunes on Samsung TVs. I mean, that Steve Jobs screamed his head off at Samsung for copying the design of the iPhone. And yet here we are with iTunes on Samsung TVs. It's wacky. It's just crazy to think how things have changed. They're going to have to do something, and one of the things I think that they could do to keep out in front. Actually, I don't think they're in front anymore. I'll be honest with you. I don't think they're in front anymore. I will personally stick with Apple because Android needs to get their speech act together. From a low vision perspective, Android is actually better. Okay? They offer more customization. I actually looked recently at Samsung's offerings, and they've got a pretty nice magnifier program on their Galaxy phones, and they've got cursor color enhancements for their TalkBack implementation, their screen reader. But Android as a whole, compared to VoiceOver, I even read on a forum that there was a developer that wrote that posted in this forum said that he developed for both iOS and Android, and from an accessibility standpoint for speech, iOS is honestly ahead with speech. But with low vision, because you can tweak the overall look of your device a lot more than you can with iOS, you get more, I think, more leeway for low vision users with Android. But no, back to what I was about to say. I think that in order to give Apple a good foothold with their users would be to introduce a file system. And no, I'm not talking about the Files app. The one thing that I genuinely miss with my iPhone that Android does offer, but this particular one feature, in my opinion, does not outweigh the negatives of Android compared to iOS, especially when it comes to stability and reliability. But the one feature that I do miss that my Android phones had that my iPhone does not is the ability to hook up external storage. Okay, the best thing you can do for the moment on iOS is to plug in a drive that has a compatible app, and you're still stuck within the app. With USB-C now on the iPad Pro, the newest model, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Apple does bring up something like the Finder where you could mount external drives. They need to do something, because like I said, the main reason I switched back to the iPhone was for reliability, and in the off chance something should backfire with my vision in the next several years, I would have speech when I needed it. If Android had their speech game together, I probably would have stuck with Android, and we're more reliable. I've honestly found iPhones to be more reliable than Android devices, but Apple, they need to do something. They need to do something. And perhaps, because I know that Tim Cook's going to be like, well, if we allow external storage, we're going to allow viruses, and that's not a good thing. Perhaps one way to protect a drive would be to install a key onto the drive, a cryptographic key that is in a proprietary iOS format. And as long as that key matches and Face ID is confirmed, then you can unlock the drive and gain access to your contents. You know, Apple may just have to build in an antivirus checker into iOS. Who knows? But they're going to have to become more open. They're going to have to realize that we live in a connected society now. We live, and I'm sure that they're going to be touting that, like with FaceTime. Oh, you can talk to many, many people, etc., etc. With that FaceTime bug going around, I personally have not used it as of late. Now, to my understanding, I think it only is affecting group FaceTime calls. I've never used group FaceTime. I don't intend to use group FaceTime. But iMessage, you're stuck to iOS. And a lot of people are saying, well, you should bring iMessage to Android. They might have to do it. They genuinely might have to do it because they're going to have to do. I know I keep saying this, but they are going to have to do something. They are not in a good spot at the moment. One of the great things about Android is the fact that you have so much customizability. One of the things they revealed at CES was this Reol, REYOLE, Flex Pi, FLEXPAI, foldable phone. It was a disaster. However, proof of concept would not have been possible without Android. And Google is supposedly building code into Android to allow for use with foldable phones. And they are still very much in the infant stages with this technology. The phone is not cheap. The software is buggy. The folding mechanism itself results in a device that is barely pocketable. You can call it that because you're basically taking a 7-inch, you're basically taking a device the size of the iPad mini and trying to fold it down into a pocketable form factor. Now, if this genuinely takes off over the next couple of years, we might see something. Personally, if I were to bank on a foldable phone, I would want to see something like this Motorola Razr. Now, for those of you who cannot see, we have something that looks very much like the Razr of old, of the 90s and the early 2000s. I honestly was very fond of the overall design of the Razr, but I never picked one up because, number one, I didn't think it was available on Verizon. Number two, it was expensive. And number three, most importantly, I felt there was no tactile feedback on the keypad. It was awfully flat, and I honestly felt that because of my depth perception and vision problems, that it wouldn't have worked out. That doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy the design. Motorola really had something with the Razr, and they're supposedly going to be reintroducing it with a foldable form factor. Now that is the sort of foldable phone that I would like to see, because Samsung Convoy, classic foldable phone. I mean, there is nothing. I genuinely miss this form factor, okay? I miss being able to more securely hold my phone. This little bend here really made things a lot easier. And for those of you who cannot see, just take any old flip phone and you'll know immediately what I'm talking about. And being able to hang up on somebody like that, you just close it up like that. Now, Samsung has brought together some foldable phones for their home market, but they've never seen any sales outside of Korea. I think that was a mistake, because if it were my money, my dream phone would be something with the smarts of an Android or Chrome OS driven phone. And yes, I just did say Chrome OS because I'm still very much a fan of the possibility of something like Chrome OS being available on phones to replace Android. Because Android, I mean, phone companies are not even talking about it in their publishing materials. Okay, that says something. I mean, compared to Android, Chrome OS is far more up to date. You have a much better chance of getting updates for your device, and because Chrome OS is being built for tablets, there's no reason, in my opinion, that they couldn't shrink that down to a phone interface. But something like a smartphone-driven interface, the power of the smartphone in the form factor of something like the Motorola Razr. These are the things that Apple is going to have to see about investing in if they want their iPhone to continue. Now, the iPhone's always going to sell, but it may end up, I mean, look at this. Look at this. The PC won in the personal computer space. The Macintosh is gaining steam, but that's still, the usage share compared to Windows PCs is nothing. It's the same thing with Android devices. Well, I shouldn't say nothing. It's smaller. Okay, it's gaining steam, but it's still smaller than Windows. Same thing with the iOS versus Android. In the US, the numbers may be pretty well neck and neck, but elsewhere in the world, especially in developing countries, Android is the king. And the reason is because Android, particularly their Android One project, is able to run on devices that can support much lower-end hardware. India, for example. India is one of the biggest markets Apple's trying to penetrate. And one of the reasons that Xiaomi and other Chinese manufacturers are doing so well in India, and along with Samsung's lower-end devices, is because of the fact that they are able to offer a quality device for a very, very low cost. And given the low overall GDP of that area, I mean, it makes perfect sense why Android would be the dominating platform over there. And Apple's going to have to swallow their pride, I feel. Apple's going to have to they're going to have to swallow their pride. And they're going to have to do something. One of the things they're trying to do, and I just mentioned earlier regarding this business of the iTunes, integration into the Samsung TVs, is to become a services company. And TechAltar did a video not long ago regarding that very concept, and he questioned whether or not Apple was going to be able to hold on to their privacy ideals, because he mentioned that a lot of these services companies didn't win by necessarily protecting your privacy. So that is, I don't know where that's going to be headed. That is a bucket of worms, or it's just not a good situation. I mean, I myself, I've been on social media now for the last 10 years. This was all before Snowden. This was before, I've been on YouTube for 10 years. This was before Snowden. This was before Cambridge Analytica. This was before all this came to light and we began to really understand the dangers and the pitfalls. In fact, a lot of people these days are basically telling new internet users, rather than worrying about protecting their privacy, they're basically going at it from the angle of watch what you put up there. And if we're going to have to do something in terms of protecting our privacy, but a lot of people feel the only way to do it is with the government in order to really reel in these companies, because the data collection is genuinely, it's necessary. The reselling of the data is not necessary, but the data collection is necessary in order to provide these services. And unfortunately, Apple may end up finding itself in a position where they may have to compromise some of their privacy ideals in order to win out in the market. Another example of this customization is the Meizu, M-E-I-Z-U, Zero. Why do they call it the Zero? Well, this thing's got 3 cameras, an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor in the screen, and no ports. None. Zilch. No headphone jack, no USB-C, nothing. No buttons even. Supposedly what's going to happen is you just have to feel for them and squeeze for them. And I'm thinking, good luck. But the point is, this is the sort of hardware innovation that these kinds of operating systems allow that Apple used to be known for. Under Steve Jobs, they used to be known for this. Another example of the versatility is the fact that you can create assistive technologies with Android. Now, Apple, yes, Apple is the go-to for speech assistive technologies. I will not dispute that. Unfortunately, it's expensive. All assistive technology is expensive, but Apple is, particularly when it comes to like the iPhone XS Max, a fully bloated one with AppleCare Plus, is almost $2,000, which is just, no, it's insane. Apple's going to have to swallow their pride, because being open allows for assistive technologies like the Braille Sense Polaris, which is a, for those of you who cannot see, I'm showing a picture of the Braille Sense Polaris Mini, which is a 20-cell Android-driven Braille note taker. And what the company, the manufacturer HIMS, was able to do was to take Android and build their own proprietary software from prior Braille Sense units on top of Android to allow for both mainstream and special assistive technologies. Now, iOS, when it comes to speech technologies, again, is, to my knowledge, really the go-to when it comes to mainstream assistive technologies. But outside of that, like I said, for speech, it's good. But I think for low vision, Android has the leg up. This device, for those of you who cannot see, you're looking at a 16-inch brand new digital video magnifier called the Reveal 16 by Humanware. There are two versions, the Reveal 16 and the Reveal 16i. The i version is a senior-friendly Android computer. You know, they get access to the Google Play Store, they get access to YouTube, they get access to all these things in a friendly, easy-to-use format. This is what I call, honestly, this is innovating. This is new form factors, new software, new hardware, new ways of trying things. In fact, I've been wondering about whether or not, if you watched the movie Minority Report, you'll probably remember in the movie that the telephones they used in that film were primarily headsets, Bluetooth headsets, particularly at the headquarters. I mean, they weren't connected necessarily, at least to my knowledge. I don't think they were connected to anything. They were self-contained units. And I was thinking about things like texting, checking up on your news through podcasts. These are all sorts of things that you could do through voice, and I wouldn't be surprised if maybe one of these days Google could build an operating system that is driven entirely by the Google Assistant, and that would be your phone. I can't tell you how many people I walk by these days and they look down at their phone, and having a headset, a completely audio-driven phone interface, may help to negate this. And again, that's just me thinking, right? But it's just crazy to think that Apple, who used to be on the top of things, and with things like this beautiful, beautiful eMac, have become so stagnant. And I'm an Apple user. This is coming from somebody who's used Apple for 18 years. My next computer may very well be a smaller Chromebook. I might get a Chrome base for my summer house, because that is a zero maintenance system that I can count on to get me online and without having to worry about setting anything up. I just don't know what's going to happen with Apple. They're obviously not going anywhere. I remember mentioning that in a prior video. Apple's certainly not going anywhere. But they used to be up at the top. And now it's almost like they're following in the footsteps of everyone else. I mean, I don't know. It's still early in the year. We'll have to see what happens, but they're going to have to do something, especially after this last quarter. But what do you guys think? Thank you for watching. Comments are welcome, and have a nice day.